Welcome to Radical Safety. We've got an interview today I've been very much looking forward to because this gentleman has decades of experience in the corporate world, hung a shingle in the consulting world, and now can give us a perspective on both sides about the safety space and the kinds of things we can do as safety leaders. Greg Corrali, welcome to Radical Safety interview. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, Vince. Thanks for having me.
Well, congratulations on jumping over to the consulting side of things. And you've got two sides to it. And one of the stories that caught my attention as we kind of dive into this, what kinds of things can we do in the safety space to reduce incidents, is understand a bit of your history. And you mentioned your introduction to safety. What's that story again?
Yeah, it was kind of my introduction to industrial safety in business. I was 18 years old, working for the local gas utility, digging ditches for the gas department. And while I was working on the job one day, I was performing a task called chipping an old cast iron gas main, which is essentially getting the covering off of it. The main was leaking, and then you can, once you do that, you can put a clamp on it, right, and stop this leak. Well, at some point while I had my self-contained breathing apparatus on and was doing the work with this pneumatic chipping hammer, I looked up on top of the hole and I saw one of my fellow crew members, and he was pointing a fire extinguisher at me. I thought that was kind of odd at the time, but then when the job took a pause and I got back out and talked to him, I said, "What was that all about?" And he said, "Well, I had to make sure, just in case you became a ball of flames, I was there to put you out." And I said, "I guess that makes sense." So that was my introduction to safety. And, fast forward 35 years, I worked in that same industry, the gas and electric utility industry, for all of that time, 4 different corporations. And I've been involved with working with union leaders, senior management, employees, safety committees, you name it, trying to transform safety culture for all of that time. And it's not an easy task. It can be a very hazardous industry. A lot of progress was made, but a lot of tragedy along the way as well. And, it's been a terrific career, and working with employees to make things safer has been certainly a big reward.
Well, it's certainly a gratifying industry to be part of. And a few things come to mind. One is that, the human condition, let's talk about that. What is the saying by JFK? The best time to fix a leaky roof is when the sun is shining. But that's not the human nature, right? Something has to go wrong, and then we go, wait a minute, how do we address this? So from a leader's standpoint, how do you get in front of the safety protocol? How do you get in front of things rather than in a reactionary mode, which is the guy with with this fire extinguisher? It was a reactionary move, it wasn't any precaution in that. It was just saying, okay, if something goes bad, I'll put you out. So talk a bit about that, about the reactionary versus how do you get in front of things?
Sure. I would say that that's where the engineering comes in, quite frankly, and looking at data, right? Too often, there could be knee-jerk reactions on what are the most important things to work on when it comes to safety. And although a lot of progress has been made in the utility industry and other industries, sometimes people end up working on the wrong things. So you've got to let data drive the decision. So where are you having your accidents? What does the data say? Does it say that 50 to 60% of your incidents are happening when you perform this particular critical task? Well, then that's where you should probably spend the bulk of your time. Where are people going to get maimed or, God forbid, killed? That's where you should spend your time. There's a lot of little things to fix, and those are good too, because it establishes, a whole discipline and culture about paying attention to the details and the small stuff and making sure that you don't take any shortcuts and doing all the right things. But, over the last decade, I would say there's been more of a focus on what are those things that could really go wrong, and maybe that's where you spend the bulk of your time.
We're finding in our research that the data and the analytics and the AI, for example, have been very helpful in terms of reducing incident rates, but we're still coming down to the human error element. Can you speak a bit to mitigating that human error piece? And as a leader, how do you do that?
Well, that's the special sauce, so to speak. I for most of my career, You know, a lot of the safety improvements and safety work has been based on data, good policy and procedure, right? Here's where you've had accidents and tragedies before, and you put good policy and practice, equipment and tools in place to mitigate hazards, right, and to eliminate them and improve in that fashion. But it was of late, towards the end of my career, where there was more of an emphasis on this emotional connection with employees. So, you know, let me give you an example. The last company I worked for, we actually developed a safety brand, right, that could hit home with employees, and it was called For Family, For Life. And we built a whole safety program and platform around that brand. And it was something you could anchor all the things that you do when it comes to safety on, right? And that establishes the emotional connection with employees. I mean, why else would you want to work safely, right? It's for your wife or husband or kids or family. That's the reason you work safely every day. Now, that's not to say that, you know, we didn't use that 30 years ago, right? I can remember somebody taking a picture out of their wallet of their wife and kids and saying, hey, here's why you should work safely every day. No doubt about it, that was effective. But now I think it's becoming a bit more pervasive, where people are building brands and doing much more programmatic type of things, you know, to establish that emotional and human connection with employees.
Well, okay, so let me play devil's advocate here. For Family for Life, you know, the campaign, it's a coalescing statement, something people can identify with. How, as a leader, do you get people to emotionally connect to a sign, right? It could be a sign and they're like, all right, got it. But until they emotionally connect to it, how do you create that kind of connection to that emotional initiative?
Well, it's multifaceted, right? It's not just a slogan that they see once and they say, oh, that was nice, right? And then, you know, what else is going to happen from that? You essentially build an entire program around that particular brand. Whether it's constant communication and messaging, right? Whether it's emails, whether it's face-to-face talks, whether it's leaders out in the field talking about that particular brand and emotional connection. So it's a lot of communication. Yeah, you can give away the trinkets and the reminders and things like that, but you know, you have to look at your entire safety program. You have safety council meetings, right? You have leaders involved in safety. How do you incorporate something like that emotional connection into the things that we do? So you look for opportunities. It's not easy, but you look for those opportunities, and it's always that anchor you come back to. Why are we making this procedure maybe a little bit more strict? Why are we putting this particular practice in place? Why did we give you this new tool over here? It's because we want you to come home safe at the end of the day in the exact same condition that you came to work.
Well, that's what we found with Radical Safety. We actually have a 3-stage process, and it starts with the leadership saying, if we could come up with a coalescing statement, that we call it the emotional buzz, which is very similar, and to have them come up with it, then it's their idea. You know, my mom, I can remember early on us learning, she said, if you want to do something, make it your dad's idea. And we would watch her kind of finesse how he would go, hey, we should go to Hawaii. She goes, that's a great idea. And so,
well, look, you just hit on one of the keys, right? Employee engagement. I mean, we learned that early on, decades ago. If you don't engage employees, unions, employee influential leaders out there, and get them involved in the effort, if it's management creating this, right, and cramming the idea down employees' throats, it's never going to work. Right. So even with this latest brand development, that brand wasn't developed by management. It was developed by the employees.
Good.
So we put it out there. They came up with a few. They ended up voting on it. And the employees are the ones who chose that brand. So, you know, more meaningful when they own it.
And more meaningful when they decide that it means something specific. Like they could picture their coming home to their daughters or at night, or, you know, going on a family holiday with all their limbs, you know, to really be a connection to that. I just can't underemphasize that that's the starting place. And I mean, finding a lot of protocol-driven initiatives. We're doing this interview as we're re-entering. We're coming out of the pandemic slowly, obviously, everybody knows that. But I'm seeing checklists. I'm seeing a lot of checklists. We got to do these things, forgetting that it's the emotional connection, the leaders. So speak a bit about reentry and, you know, how we can not have the checklist be the initial thing we do. What kinds of things can we do to, in real time, right now, to connect with our people and for them to connect with where we're headed?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I wrote about this a little bit in my leadership blog, but communication is key, right? But I would say there are kind of three things that I have seen companies do really well, and that, you know, I learned to do with colleagues and leaders throughout my history as well when tragic events happen. I mean, so you've got whether it's the coronavirus, whether it's the Boeing 737 MAX issue, or going back, you know, quite a ways now, the Tylenol scare, right? You do the right thing right at the outset. You pull the product from the shelf. You ground the planes, right? You suspend that activity where that tragedy occurred, right? That's going to be very visible, right? Because you don't know what happened at that point. You still have to investigate. You don't know what the facts are. So you've got to take some immediate action. And then what employees, regulators, and the public, right, all stakeholders are looking for is what's going on. Give me some updates. So it's all about communication. The communication's got to be hearty, and it's got to be meaty, and it's got to be frequent. So you can't just do it once and forget about it. People are looking for updates. You know, hey, what's going on with that investigation? How are those employees doing at home? They were hurt on the job, et cetera. They want to know. They care about their colleagues. You know, and then lastly, I would say employees want to see meaningful, permanent, and lasting change. All right, so this event happened. What did we actually modify? Did we just put these temporary procedures in place and now we're going to go back to the way things used to be, back to normal? Well, look, you and I know, and everybody else knows, we're not going back to normal after these events that have happened, right? Things have changed forever. I would guarantee that corporations have already put in new practices and policies that'll become permanent, right? And that's going to make the workplace healthier and safer, no doubt. So you've got to make those permanent, lasting changes, and that's when employees will see it and they'll know it's real.
All right, let's talk about a culture. You know, imagine a culture out there that there's a lot of cynicism, that the leadership said they were going to do one thing and didn't. How do we turn that around? How do we turn around a culture of cynicism where everything from, you know, employees going, oh, God, I got to do this safety course now, you know? What kinds of things can we do to mitigate that kind of cynicism?
Well, I think there's two sides to that coin. If you know, and the data supports, you know, a company taking a certain action, putting a policy in place, or making sure there's a safe procedure to perform a task, you don't relent on that, right? You don't acquiesce. You're trying to save employees' lives and keep them safe. But, you know, the other thing, I've seen it happen, yes, in all the companies I work for and many more. You can go too far. And this is one of the mistakes companies have made. They swing that pendulum from one side to the other and they overreact. And they put this egregious policy in place. You know, OSHA's done it, others have done it, where you put this practice in place and employees are sitting there scratching their head, and even management scratching their head saying, boy, why do we need to do this? This seems like overly burdensome. And, you know, employees can sense that. And when you do it, they're not going to buy in. They're not going to own it. So they have a right to push back. So what do? You engage with your employees. You have the discussion. You get the feedback. And if you then, based on that, can modify procedures to something that makes sense, right? It's logical to employees. And you get all the right leadership on board, whether it's union or management, then I think you're good to go.
All right. Here's something I'm noticing a lot. And from your perspective as a leader, is I've heard it repeatedly. I wish leadership would just come to our safety training. I wish they would just show up. But, you know, to have, when you say engagement, I hear just show up. Like management by walking around even is as simple as it sounds, isn't as calm as it needs to be. What kinds of things have you noticed in your years of this, of the effect of leadership showing up?
Yeah, first and foremost, you know, fundamentally leaders, you need to be seen where the work gets done, right? This is for safety. It's for everything you do. It's for every aspect of business. You can't sit in your office and manage safety. You need to go out and see employees where they work. Put on that, on the FR clothing, right? Go try and do what an employee does every day, right? Or at least go see them, talk to them on the job site. They will have so much respect for you. I did a number of things, in the past. I literally dropped on top of a transmission tower, electric transmission tower from a helicopter in our training yard back in California. And employees, when they saw me do that and they heard that I did that, some of them hadn't even done it. And they were so impressed. It gave me like instant credibility as a leader, but that's not why I did it. I just wanted to have a glimpse, right? That feeling of what employees go through when they perform their job, right? I climbed a pole, I put on all the gear. I didn't climb all the way up, right? I'm an engineer, I'm not a lineman, but I climbed up to about 10, 12 feet just to feel what they feel, a little glimpse. I'll never know what they know to do that job and all the hazards, but the credibility and respect that you get as a leader when you go to employees and actually show that you care and have some appreciation, it's immense. And to your other point, about going to the training, we did this in the company I worked for back in California. There was a training where we put every single employee after a tragedy through some new training. We actually mandated in management that a senior leader show up at every single training session. Good. There was a schedule, there was a calendar, right. And I will tell you, I showed up at dozens myself, and so did every other vice president and senior vice president, and maybe even the president and CEO showing up at a couple of these as well. So it can be done.
Yeah, it has to be done. I had this one client, it was just, they had hired me to do an assessment, came in, and it was so obvious that they had a different campus where they were on off-site. And I said, well, the problem is you're not walking around, and they never extended the contract because I didn't tell them what they wanted to hear. It was just a head scratcher. I went, all right, now they're out of business. So it's no mystery. I mean, we just really to be engaged. There's a proactive nature. And I'm hearing you say that it's not episodic in nature. It's a process of engagement that's important as well.
It's routine. You've got to build it in. It's got to be part of your schedule. If you're a leader responsible for 100 employees, 1,000 employees, 5,000 employees, you've got to make it a point to go see them where they work, and not just once a month. Yeah. How about once a week, even as a senior leader? Yeah. Get yourself out in the field and go see employees do their work.
Mm-hmm. Having those conversations, and the word gets out. Now, your podcast, the Rebel Leader podcast, what kinds of things are you attempting to accomplish with that podcast and the Rebel Leader? Talk a bit more about the importance of being a rebel leader.
Yeah, sure. In this case, more of a corporate rebel, of course, right?
Yeah.
It's somebody who challenges the conventional thinking and wisdom, right? The way things are done. Many companies speak of wanting culture change, right? And maybe these are some of the, companies in the industries that have been around for a while, 100 years or more, right? Maybe it's not some of the new tech companies. They're looking to establish their new culture, quite frankly. But, a lot of the old industries, they've got a culture, a way of doing things that needs to be challenged. And so, one of the quotes that I've got on my new website, gregcorrali.com, it's my quote: challenge everything, set the bar incredibly high, and execute relentlessly. So, when it comes to safety, challenge everything. Don't just walk by what you might think is a safety infraction. Ask. You don't have to be a jerk about it, right? But ask an employee, hey, I noticed that on the job site. Is that right? Or, what's the procedure around that? Or what's the right equipment to use? And certainly setting the bar incredibly high, we all have that vision, right? It's zero injuries or zero fatalities or serious injuries. So we have a lot of agreement about the goal. We don't always have agreement on exactly how to get there, but who would argue with setting that as a target? And although zero is perfection, maybe if you shoot for that, you don't get to perfection, but you achieve excellence, right? And I've seen that over my career. I've seen many companies that have drastically reduced the number of injuries and fatalities. And then lastly, execute relentlessly. Employees want to see action. They don't want to just hear the rhetoric and the words. When you make permanent lasting action and then you communicate it and you train people on it and then you talk to them about it and then you ask them for feedback, then they say, hey, wow, they really did something different here, right? They made a permanent change and we're going to become safer because of it. So It's all about challenging that thinking. Corporate America, as Jack Welch used to say, right? Corporations are the lifeblood of America. Now, I know some would say small businesses are as well, and they both work together
Yeah.
to make it happen. They do. But corporations have done so much good, but it doesn't always mean, and leaders have acknowledged that culture needs to change, and it needs to change for the better. So, challenge that conventional thinking and try and make things better each and every day.
I'm going to ask you a strange question because I would like you to describe your ideal client, but the purpose of the question is for any safety leader understanding or hearing this to kind of say, hey, this is how I can get the most from my consultant and somebody that does what we do. So talk about your ideal client with that in mind of what we could learn from that.
The thing that comes to mind for me, and I'm actually going to do a podcast on this, is pride. Pride, I say, is the deadliest of the 7 deadly sins. When it comes to corporations, if you have pride and too much of it, you're not open to change. Right. And you're not open to new ways of thinking. You get trapped in your own culture. So the best client I think that anyone could have is someone who acknowledges, and let's say there's even been great progress that's made in that company. The leader who acknowledges, you know what, we can do better. So yes, we've got some good practices. Let's take stock of that, but let's have somebody come in, a third party, right? An outside perspective, and just give us a fresh set of eyes on things. If there's 1 or 2 things that they kind of lead us to that make us even better, cheaper, faster, better, safer, then isn't it worth it? So to me, the ideal client's got to be coachable and open to changing for the better.
All right, okay, let's say we have that ideal client, but there's that one cynic, the one that can hijack an interaction as a consultant or whatever. How do we deal with that hijacker, if you will?
Well, there's always that one cynic. In fact,
there always is. I can picture him now.
There's usually a couple, and I've come across many. And I tell you, it was a mistake I made early on in my career. You got to get to that influential leader. And in my case, it was more senior management. If you didn't get to that right influential leader and get them on board, let me tell you something, they could derail your whole safety improvement effort.
Right.
So whoever the critic is, whoever the cynic is, whether it's employee working on the front line, a supervisor, or the CEO, or any one of his or her underlings, go spend time with them, understand their perspective, ask them for their help. Try and get agreement that here's where we're going. This is the challenge. And I need your help. We need your help. And everybody working together to get there. So how can you help me? How can I help you, right? So that we can get the right people together and work on this together. And I think, doing whatever you need to do to get that cynic on board, make them, as you said earlier, make them part of the solution.
Yeah, right. Well, we're approaching the end here, but something popped up with a client, an oil and gas client, who their biggest issue at that time was this, what they called the cowboy mentality, where there were a couple of iconic leaders, management level, who were saying, I don't need that mask. I can just go in and cap that off and then turn around and get back. And they elevated their legendary status by not annihilating themselves and being courageous, if you will. When we have those kind of players, we talked about the cynics. What about the cowboy mentality, that somebody that can really derail the safety protocol with this iconic positioning? Have you seen that in your career, and how would you address that?
I have, unfortunately, too many times. And those cowboys, so to speak, they could be a frontline worker, or they could be in senior management, as you said. And I will tell you, you can try and get them on board. There's no doubt about it. And you can coach, you can try and make them part of the solution, all the things we talked about. And if it doesn't work, there's one other option. And I think we all know what that is. And I've seen it happen.
Right.
And unfortunately you're affecting people's livelihood, but I've seen it happen. Have I let supervisors, managers, superintendents, directors, et cetera, let them go before? I absolutely have, because they weren't getting it when it came to safety. I mean, you can't have somebody that's actively resisting where it is you're trying to go, you need the right leaders on your team, not just to manage safety, but to manage all aspects of the business. And unfortunately, I've seen it with employees too, and you've got to move them on their way. I can remember talking to union employees and even frontline supervisors to say, look, here's where we're going. I know this is the way you used to do things here. I'm telling you it needs to change, and here's why. I want you to come on board. You're a valuable employee. You've got a lot of experience. You can really help us. But what we certainly won't tolerate is you continuing to act in this fashion and breaking the rules. And if you do it again, you're going to have to find a new place to work. And sometimes it actually ends up that way, Vince.
Yeah. Well, on that downer, I'm kidding. It really is. I was just thinking about it. I had a little spot of cancer on my leg, right, and back. And I went to the, it was basal cell melanoma. So there's the stuff that you burn off to be precautionary. Then there's the little spot of cancer, which in this case could grow unless you cut it out. And then there's the real bad melanoma where radiation and all that. Well, I had this middle one where she cut out not only the cancer, but around it and said, I don't want this to grow. I could have done the cowboy thing and said, I'm just going to leave it in there and let it tough it out. Well, how does that work out for you? So what I'm hearing is if there is a cancer, you cut it out. I mean, you just can't address it sometimes in any other way. So I respect that.
Yeah, you can't let those problems fester because then they turn into tragedies, unfortunately.
Right, exactly. Well, there you go. Well, life lessons along the way. If people would like to get a hold of you, Greg, how would they do that?
Oh, it's easy. GregCorrali.com. That's my website. My leadership blog is there. My leadership podcast, they can subscribe there. I'm trying to give back now to leaders, employees, et cetera, who maybe just entered the corporate world, or maybe they're middle managers, maybe they're even junior executives. I've kind of been there and done that over the last 35 years. So I'm trying to pay it forward. Here's all the experience that I had. And that experience, by the way, it's not just me. I've had dozens and dozens of leaders who have shaped the kind of leader that I am. I've had thousands of employees and colleagues that trained me, helped me develop into who I am. So literally, I want to give back all that experience to people who are now trying to navigate the corporate world. So any way I can help out, I'm committed to their success.
Well, that is not surprising. That's how we came together. You were highly, highly recommended to some of the top safety leaders on the planet. So you are in the right place in the right time, especially in these times. So thank you very much for your time on this interview, and let's stay in touch.
You're very welcome. I very much appreciate it. Take care.
All right, you too.